As reality becomes ever closer to, or even more absurd than, Deus Ex, the game is, in consequence, able to retain cultural relevance, at least among a certain segment of the gaming commentariat and a cabal of old posters on V. So, contrarian that I am, I feel obligated to push back on over a quarter century of propaganda about Deus Ex so that we're not overselling it either to ourselves or to newcomers. And I'm not talking about its thematic relevance to the modern day. That part is not overblown, though it was admittedly somewhat unintentional, since its conspiracy wank plot was supposed to be X-Files tier ridiculous, not realistic. I'm talking about most other aspects of the game, many of which are flat out untrue or misconstrued seemingly through truth by repetition. I'm starting to think even the 8 out of 10 scores it got at launch might be a bit generous. Let's tackle the biggest one that gets repeated ad nauseum. Game reactivity to player choice. If you listen to a review of Deus Ex, you are likely to come away with the impression there's an inevitable singular main quest but a bunch of choice available on the margins in the side content. The fact people still parrot this idea leads me to suspect they never play the game past Act 1 before they review it. Something further reinforced by how much critics tend to overemphasize the world and character building that takes place in UNATCO HQ as if it's a major part of the game, when in fact it's only present in Act 1. Likewise, most of the game's reactivity is confined to Act 1. Things like going lethal in Battery Park, which is bugged anyway, handling the subway hostages, shooting Leo Gold, saving Lebedev, etc. The effects are rarely major, but they do exist. Saving Lebedev nets you some lore exposition before rather than after your last UNATCO visit, for example. But once you leave for Hong Kong, the reactivity of NPCs and side quests falls off a cliff. The only side quest with any consequence is going to the Wan Chai police station if you're dumb or curious enough to listen to Chow, as she will disappear from her penthouse once you do it, meaning you will have to face off with her later at the Universal Constructor, not that she's much of a threat anyway. It only gets more sparse from there. Either due to a deliberate removal or a bug, I'm not sure it's ever been determined exactly which, you don't get a discount from Smuggler after your first trip to Hell's Kitchen for saving Ford Schick, who is also absent from the game after his introduction. You can literally kill off Silhouette and it changes nothing. Dowd survives to the end whether you give him Ambrosia or not. Finding the Templar gold nets you nothing, etc. The only reactive elements I can recall from the latter half of the game are the payoff from the Act 1 decision to retain Jaime as a spy or not, so really it's an Act 1 choice, and not getting an AUG upgrade from Savage if his daughter dies. The game is overwhelmingly linear, narratively, even in the side content, with the vast majority of non-linearity being front-loaded, and the people touting the game as a hyper-reactive one where your choices matter are perhaps betraying the fact they only replayed Act 1 before they began opining. Player choice that is actively facilitated by the game is how to engage with and move through levels. The variety is in the gameplay, not the story. However, I should point out that not all playstyles are balanced or created equal. For instance, doing a melee build in Act 1 is an exercise in tedium, since a single miss takedown, which is a mechanic the game doesn't actually explain exists, and is also easy to whiff due to the game's wonky hitboxes, can get you shot in the face, and the levels are not exactly riddled with tons of clutter to hide behind like the newer games are. However, once you get the Run Silent and Cloak Augs and the Nano Sword in Hong Kong, you're an unstoppable ninja. Heavy weapon builds are gimped due to the plasma rifle having been incorrectly given multiplayer damage in single player, meaning it's never worth using, meaning you're stuck wasting GEP rockets on enemies you can't burn with a flamethrower. Swimming is the eternal meme skill everyone dunks on is useless, of course, but far fewer people dunk on environmental training, which buffs the effectiveness and lifespan of wearable equipment. This skill, and the equipment itself, are rendered useless due to the baffling decision to make equipment timed power-ups that are single-use and cannot be toggled on and off, meaning they are mostly a complete waste outside of particular areas where there is a substantial obstacle that equipment can deal with, so a high enemy population area for armor or camo, a long irradiated section for the hazmat suit, or a long water section for the rebreather. Putting points into this skill simply causes even more of the equipment's timer to be wasted since it just extends the duration. You are literally wasting skill points on almost certainly wasted time. It's amazing how simple the fix would be too. Any mod that allows equipment to be turned off and on as needed suddenly makes it worth using and investing points into. Why Ionstorm thought the timed power-up approach made any fucking sense beyond the timed power-ups being a staple of shooters at the time, I don't know, but it renders a second skill out of an already limited pool worthless. And let's not spare the guns from the magnifying glass either, because this shit truly is borked. It's kind of hilarious looking at the difference between the dynamic crosshair of Deus Ex versus 1998's Rainbow Six. Like in an RPG, each operator in Rainbow Six has a different accuracy rating based on their firearm skill, but the crosshair is still relatively tight regardless when standing still. The crosshair expands with any movement, which includes the camera, not just your legs, but it recenters quite quickly. If Deus Ex wanted a dynamic crosshair, that is the model they should have gone with. The one they went with is absolutely infuriating, and there is a reason no subsequent game used it. The pistol and rifle skills are effectively required to be at master level to make weapons generally usable in a gunfight, as your crosshair at low skills is absurdly wide. Luckily, it only expands after you move a certain distance. You can take a few steps and not lose any accuracy, but God help you if you need to move and shoot, or shoot right after moving, because it takes so long for your crosshair to shrink, you might as well not bother. If you made the unfortunate decision to invest in anything other than pistols or rifles at character creation, I hope you're prepared to engage in the early game's tedious stealth melee until you can level them up, because you aren't hitting shit in a gunfight, so even trying to engage in one just isn't worth the risk. The game is a serviceable shooter if you master a gun skill, but it is mandatory that you do so. Until then, you're basically forced into a stealth playstyle. That is, unless you happen to notice that sticking a laser on your gun makes it completely accurate. The game doesn't tell you at all that this is what the laser does, but yes, the laser attachment completely bypasses the gun skills and makes your bullets go wherever the laser dot is pointing. Which means that, in fact, you actually don't have to invest into gun skills at all. You can simply beeline for the laser mod in the first level, slap it on your pistol or sniper rifle, and be set for the rest of the game. Free to spend your points on maxing out something else, like the very expensive masteries for lockpicking and electronics. In a sensibly designed game, especially one with RPG skill mechanics like this, a laser attachment would not bypass an entire skill line for free. It would, say, give an equivalent of one skill level upgrade to a gun. That is, if you had an advanced pistol skill, but your pistol had a laser attached, it would be identical to a stock pistol at master. It would let you save on having to master a skill, not sidestep it entirely. Of course, given how awful the shooting is at anything less than master skill, or advanced skill plus a pile of accuracy mods, the laser is a godsend, but the solution to a badly designed skill system is not to offer a way to bypass it. Why the hell would you put that terrible skill into the game in the first place then? The whole thing is fucked from both ends. And you know what the worst part is? For some reason, again, whether this is intentional or a bug is unknown, pairing a laser with a scope attachment nullifies the laser. Again, the game doesn't tell you that. So it's entirely possible for you to put a scope on your pistol, then put a laser on it, notice no difference, and conclude the laser does nothing. You can also stick the laser on the crossbow and the plasma rifle, but because those weapons fire projectiles rather than being hit scan, it does absolutely nothing there either. The incompetence on display here, both in terms of design and also in communicating the mechanics to the player, is utterly baffling and should get way more flack from critics than it does. It doesn't end there either, since the game outright lies to the player about what weapons are stealthy. The tranq darts for the crossbow don't down targets instantly, meaning they are aggroed in the meantime. In other words, they literally cannot be used in a stealthy manner, making them practically useless. Only the normal darts kill in a single headshot, and they are much rarer than tranq darts, making the crossbow of questionable utility. The stealth pistol, bizarrely, cannot kill in a single headshot, making it much more likely for an enemy to aggro and alert other enemies before you can down them. The regular pistol, ironically, is a more stealthy weapon because so long as you fire from outside audio range, the enemies in the game are half blind and half deaf, so that range is much shorter than you'd think it should be, you can down them in one headshot, meaning other enemies will not have the opportunity to aggro and telepathically know exactly where you are. The only real ranged stealth weapon other than regular crossbow darts is a sniper rifle with a silencer attachment, but you won't find one of those until the end of Act 1, meaning you either need to waste points on your pistol skill so you can use the crossbow until then, or just suck it up and go melee only until then. Although, if you're spec'd into rifles, you can also just go in loud until you get a silencer. And despite its description, the PS20 is not a stealth pistol. and also suffers from having its damage nerfed just like the plasma rifle, making it even more useless. In effect, the gameplay variety is harmed by having so many of the tools in its toolbox be poorly designed and not worth using. The level design and augmentations save it in the end, in my opinion, but without a doubt, your ability to play in and with those spaces is brought down by the shortcomings of the skill system and several of the weapons. The game has more potential on this front than the shortcomings allow it to realize, which is why mods that fix some of these problems are such a godsend for the game. I won't criticize the writing too much beyond how contrived many of the game scenarios are for the sake of it being a game, which is fine. I won't harp on that. A lot of the dialogue can feel too utilitarian, too exposition dumpy, or just generally sounding like a mouthpiece for the game, rather than something the person speaking would actually say, which is part of a larger point that the game has very little character, literally. There is almost nothing to any of the characters in this game. It is firmly a plot and theme-driven story, which is, again, fine, though it would still have benefited from having a better human skin over top of it. Every character with something to sell, listing their prices out loud, every character giving you a password, blurting it out just as loudly, or the player only being given dialogue options in brazen binaries where one response will get you something and the other won't, strains credibility and is the verbal form of a game being, well, gamey. But no shortcoming of the actual writing is in the same league as the vocal performances of those lines. Good fucking God, how are people still defending this shit? You never see anyone defend Spectre doing this same thing in System Shock, that is, having the characters be voiced by random developers instead of actual actors. So why the fuck is it defended in Deus Ex? Because JC has some memeable lines? Because the game is highly quotable? That's a function of the writing. You quote the game to this day because Sheldon Picotti wrote those lines, not because the actor that delivered them did it properly. Hell, in most cases, the lines are done an outright disservice by the dogshit acting that gives completely incorrect emphasis and inflection. Most of the dialogue sounds better in your head, read as text, than heard spoken in the game. The praise I see for the game's dialogue is either misplaced respect for the writing, that is, they should be praising the writing of that dialogue, not its vocal delivery, or some terminal case of room-itis, where you turn your amusement at the incompetence of a piece of media into unironic praise. The only criticism most do seem to agree on and will admit is that the game looks like ass, even for its time of release, and is doing itself absolutely no favors on that front. As such, I won't dwell on it. I'm not, to conclude, saying all this as a purely contrarian hater. I have played Deus Ex many times. Every year, as the game gets closer and closer to literally matching our reality, it only becomes more and more relevant and worth retaining as a cultural artifact. But we shouldn't lie about where that strength lies, nor gloss over or ignore what faults it does have. You're only setting up a newcomer for disappointment by giving them a false impression of the game's overall quality. The fact is that the game has well-designed levels you interact with using unbalanced or poorly thought-out mechanics while following a, in retrospect, somewhat prophetic plot. Everything about the game doesn't need to be presented as being perfect, nor do you still need to be calling it the greatest game ever made 26 years later. Despite its faults, there is still plenty reason to recommend it. Don't set people up to be disappointed and consequently turn against it.